It's kind of funny when I tell people that I play guitar. Most of the time they ask me if I compose. And for a very long time I used to say no. And it was really interesting. It made me think, when I was younger, when I did first start playing the guitar, I think I was about 12 or 13 when I started. And about 1 or 2 years later, I wrote my first piece. I think it was probably about a year later. I remember I was in, I think it was either 8th or 9th grade. And I wrote my first piece, and it was a little tremolo piece, so it sounded kind of advanced. And I remember I wrote it for a class, like for a project, for an assignment. And the music teacher legitimately thought that I didn't write it. He couldn't believe that I had written it. And I think he gave me a decent grade, but he's like, I don't think you wrote that. So that was kind of funny. But I don't know if that was something that kind of stopped me from composing, or if it's just the culture of, when you learn the classical guitar, or when you learn an instrument, classical instrument like the violin, piano, you're not really encouraged to compose. And it's really odd though, because when we're young, and I've got children, I've got a 6-year-old and 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and they all, if they play an instrument, they improvise, they compose, they make up their own melodies. It's like it's something that's innate in us. So if you're older, you've probably, maybe a long time, decades and decades ago, maybe you tried composing, and maybe you don't even remember. But I think the older we get, the more creativity tends to be discouraged in us. And if we look at the training systems of classical music, creativity, composing, arranging, improvising today are not a mainstream part of how we learn the instrument, which is very odd because most of the music we play was written by musicians who were trained in those things. So there's a huge disconnect. If you play an instrument, if you play the classical guitar or a classical instrument seriously, I'm curious if you've ever thought about composing before, and if you feel like you've been discouraged from it before. If you have, I want to give you a little encouragement. So I've got one of my favorite quotes is by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He says, "People who think my art comes easily to me. No one has devoted as much time and thought to composition as I. There is not a famous master whose music I've not industriously studied through many times." It's one of my favorite quotes, and I know it by memory now. And it's very revealing, and I think very comforting. When you read quotes from great composers like Mozart, Brahms, and Bach, you see that they were just sort of like regular people like you and me. They were just regular guys, regular girls, and they worked at their craft. They studied hard. They devoted a lot of time to it. So if composing is something that you've thought of doing, and there are all these barriers, like, oh, I wasn't born with it. I don't have the gift. I haven't studied composition before formally at school or whatever. Doesn't matter. You can do it, because that's what a lot of the quotes say. A famous quote by Bach: "If anyone is equally as industrious as I, they can accomplish as much." I'm kind of paraphrasing that one, but he's basically saying, if you work at it, if you devote a lot of time and energy to it, you can be as equally as industrious. You can compose as much beautiful music as Bach did. He did work exceptionally hard at it. It's very similar to learning an instrument. If you play an instrument, you got to practice. You have to keep your chops up. You got to practice your technique and practice the tough spots and develop and practice playing in front of people if you want to perform. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen by magic. And it's very much the same with composition. Another favorite quote I have is by Brahms, and he says that without craftsmanship, inspiration is a mere reed shaken in the wind. And I think this is where a lot of people are missing. They're missing a vital, crucial part crucial aspect to composition. We think that it's all inspiration. It's just like all like, I'm inspired, I'm in the zone, I'm just going to write. It's just the piece will write itself, and it's nothing like that. It's you write maybe like a little melody, and then a lot of craft is put into it. You start to use musical techniques, compositional techniques like sequences and form and structure and modulation and parallel periods and things like that. And when you apply those techniques, when you apply that craft to your inspired melody, that's when something beautiful happens. That's when a piece can emerge much more easily, much more readily. One of the ways to do this is to use a template. I like to call it a canvas. And you can prepare your template or your canvas by studying the music of famous masters, as said by Mozart. So what you can do is just, get a piece that you're playing already. It's always great to start with what you know already. So take a piece that you're already playing and model. It's called model composition. Take the features of that piece. What sort of structure does it use? Does it go A, B, A? What sort of form does it use? Does it go A, B? How many bars are the phrases? How many bars does it take for one phrase to complete? And do you see a pattern occurring? What sorts of harmonies are being used? Once you start asking those questions and then putting those features into your template, you can then compose your own music using that template. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Don't try to be original straight away. It doesn't happen for most people. It usually takes time and training before we become, before we find our own voice. And finding our own voice is a constant evolution anyway. It's not like you're going to find your voice and then that's it. This is how I write music and I'm not going to change, from this point. Don't feel like you have to be groundbreaking. I feel like a lot of people seem to think like if I write something, it's got to be different, unique ground. I've got to break some ground or do something different and new. If you think like that right away, it's just going to stop you from composing. You will feel discouraged. So encouragement's really important. Encourage yourself. A lot of the music we like, a lot of the music we play and listen to is incredibly simple. And I think, another quote, I can't remember this one, I could paraphrase a little bit by Chopin. He said something like, simplicity is the crowning glory of art. There's something special about simplicity. What I've noticed inexperienced composers tend to do is they try to be quite complex because they're thinking, my music has to be as great as Bach or else it's not worth writing. And then that gets you into traps, because then you try to write and you try too hard, right? You try to be more complex than you're even capable of. And simplicity is the goal anyway. So a lot of the great melodies that we know and love, a lot of the great songs and pieces and melodies are extremely simple. So I want to present a little bit of a framework for you. Once you've got your template, it's really important. That's step one. You compose with a template. Use a template. You can create a template. You can download templates. I've got templates you can download. Just check out the link in the description, or Google the Creative Classical Guitarist and you'll see some templates that you can download, or there's a free composing challenge which will give you a template. So step one is to plan. Plan your music. Plan your composition first. Base it on the music of something you're playing already. Base it on a great piece of music. Step two is to write a melody. So write a melody next. Why melody? A lot of guitarists especially tend to go to harmony, tend to go to chords, because the guitar is a chordal instrument. Chords are quite natural for us on the guitar. But I would argue that harmony is actually one of the least original aspects of music. In composition, we tend to see the same types of harmonies occurring again and again. Obviously, when we go to very modern music, it's a completely different story. I'm talking more about, tonal music, the music that we tend to hear mainstream. So you don't want to do harmony first, because harmony tends to be a bit more generic. Also, I would argue that harmony doesn't give you as many motives and themes to play with as a melody. So the next step after creating your template or using a template, planning. Step 1 is to plan. Step 2 is to write your melody. Harmony is an inherent part of melody. So once you write a melody, it will guide you. It will like create a harmony. It will lead you to harmonize the melody. So it's the melody spawns the harmony. Let's put it that way. Plus, melodies give you lots of motives, lots of themes. They could be rhythmic themes. They could be intervals. They could be shorter patterns contained within your melody. And those ideas can be developed later on in your composition. So step 1 is to plan. Step 2, write your melody. Step 3 is then to harmonize. And when you write your melody, you don't necessarily have to write the whole melody for the whole template and then add the chords. It can happen, in a bit of flux. You can write a bit of melody and then harmonize it, and then write a bit more melody and then harmonize it. So that's step 3, harmonize. If you need some guidance as to what chords to use, I'd encourage you to start with what are called the primary chords 1, 4, and 5. That in the key of C, that would be C, F, G, for example. The reason they work so well, and I learned this from Tchaikovsky's harmony book, is that all of the notes of the scale are contained in the primary chords. So in the chords C, F, and G, you will get all of the notes of the scale, the C major scale in it. So step 1 was to plan. Step 2, melody. Step 3, harmony. And then the fourth and final step, edit and refine. So this is where you can, make it simpler. You can take notes out of chords and that kind of thing. You revoice chords. You can add dynamics. You can add fingerings. Think about how you're going to play it on the instrument. So you can just edit and refine. You might make tweaks to the melody, to the rhythm, to the harmony, to just kind of enhance and refine your composition. If you go to the link in the description, you'll see a little pop-up that will lead you to a composition challenge where I guide you through a little bit of composing to get you started. So let me know if you have any questions. I'd really like to hear from you. And I've had the great pleasure to see composers who hadn't composed before. Maybe they've been playing guitar for a little while, and after just, a few months or a couple of years, year or two, they started to publish. They started to have their music published. This is the beautiful music of Gillian Robinson, who's from the UK. So she's sent me quite a number of pieces here that she's published. She also is a visual artist, so those paintings on the cover were done by her, and I've recorded several of her pieces. You can see those on my YouTube channel. And here is a book of compositions by Paul Brooks Horn, and these are fantastic pieces, all based on scripture from the Bible, and beautifully published. You can see that on Amazon, and I've really enjoyed when I received this book. In the mail, I just played through the whole book. I just loved it, really enjoyed it. And this is a book of pieces that were composed by members of the Creative Classical Guitarist. You can check this out on the website. I'll put a link in the video description. And if you do purchase this book, the funds of that go to Care and Relief for the Young, which is a great charity based in the UK that help children around the world. So there's some beautiful pieces in this book, and I've recorded all of them, and you can check that out as well on my YouTube channel or the link to the book. So that's just a very, very small tip of the iceberg of the amount of music that's been created from people who started to compose. And wow, some of these people who'd never composed before, once they got started, it's like 40, 50, 60 pieces just emerge. We get a really nice variety of things: fugues, allemands, sonatas, studies, Latin American pieces. It's really an incredible thing to see new music being created. If you could just imagine, playing your own music or hearing your own music being played. I've had the great privilege to play so many pieces by composers who are around today. And some of those composers have heard other guitarists play their music, like Craig Ogden and Tu Lee. It's an incredible experience to hear another guitarist. I've had the great pleasure of, I've heard a couple of guitarists play my music too, and it's very special. Or even a pianist has played a couple of my pieces, so it's a really, really special thing. I cannot imagine myself just playing the same standard repertoire again and again and again for decades and decades and decades. To me, there has to come a point where we start to create new music, but music that doesn't have to be avant-garde necessarily. If you want it to be, it can. It's totally fine. But you can write very tonal, very accessible music in whatever style you want to. And we got to keep music alive. We got to keep classical music alive. The way to do that, I think, is, I like to call it's kind of like this echoes of tradition idea. We look back, but we're also looking forward at the same time. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, of all the great composers who've come before us and who are around today. We get inspired by their work, and then we move forward and we communicate our own story. We communicate our own thoughts and feelings and stories and ideas through the music we write. If you don't want to do that, if you want to just learn about music, if you're a musician, you don't necessarily want to compose, but you want to learn about harmony and theory, I would argue that composing is one of the best ways to do that. I would say much more so than trying to read a harmony textbook, for example, because you have to put into practice all the things: key signatures, time signatures, note values, voice leading, part writing, harmony, melodic structures, form, counterpoint. All of these things come together as a result, you get to play it, so you get to see what it sounds like. You actually hear the result of the theory. So yeah, it's important to learn theory, and harmony textbooks definitely serve their purpose, but composition is a great way to synthesize all of your knowledge and to put it into practice. So I don't really see any reason to not compose if you play an instrument. I'd love to know, do you have a reason? What reasons are there to not compose? Thanks so much for watching and for supporting my channel. Appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel. Let me know what topics you'd like me to explore. Thanks again.